Now, when the dragon of censorship has all but been slain, available on the net. Now, hard to believe that some 40 years ago, there was one book, one small book, that polarised the government and the public.
At this point, I think that I should say that what I have to say in the rest of this comment is not suitable material for children, nor even suitable material for adults with weak stomachs. And therefore, even at the risk of being self-defeating, I think it would be better if they switched off.
Good evening. The last few weeks certainly haven't been kind to the federal censors, and especially to their chief, the Minister for Customs. The Little Red Schoolbook has had a lot to do with it. Hardly a day has gone by without that book coming under fire.
That particular session deals with abortion and advice for school children. What do you think of it?
Well, I think it's very direct.
I wouldn't like my boys to read this. I think the language here is terrible.
Well, I don't think this is the sort of thing I'd like my children to read.
I wouldn't like my daughter to read it because it's common.
I feel the whole book is so irresponsible in that most of it is based on lies and half-lies. They're asking children to build up a whole philosophy of life on untruths.
What was it, though, about the Little Red Schoolbook? A book of basic common sense for students. Written in Denmark in 1969 and imported into Australia in 1972, that so incensed the nation. What was it about a tiny book that simply gave the facts about sex education to high school kids? With advice on the dangers of drugs, along with information about education that so inflamed opinion, leading even to arrests.
From my point of view, it was very much a political problem because the book was already receiving intense scrutiny in Australia. As soon as it became known that the book had been cleared for importation in Australia by the Minister for Customs, Don Chipp, the Conservatives around the country immediately created a battlefield for it.
I do feel disappointed, disheartened as a minister of the government of this country that this has occupied the front page of almost every newspaper over what I regard as a trifling, insignificant matter. Both
the federal Minister for Education and the federal Shadow Minister for Education both proposed to Mr McMahon, the Prime Minister, that Don Chipp should be his decision should be overturned and the book should be banned.
I have a telegram, anonymous of course, by a group called Keep Pornography Out of Schools campaign, who are going to print the dirty bits, if I can use that word, out of the little book in a pamphlet and circulate it around to the schools and people in my electorate.
But the surprise came from the vigour of the Conservatives. And I say Conservatives in here because it's the only way to describe it. The Conservatives in this sense were people who were unwilling to accept liberalisation of the depiction of sexual activity.
Once in Balmain, Sandra Levy and I were shopping.
And when we came out of the supermarket, the car was surrounded by police.
There were police looking in the station wagon window, and there was some Little Red Schoolbooks there.
And then we were charged with numbers of charges of being in possession of obscene publications because they had spotted the cover of the Little Red Schoolbook, which I don't know whether you've shown the cover, but it was it just had the Little Red Schoolbook in writing. It had nothing on the cover at all.
Sergeant, is that a recording machine you've also seized?
That's one it is.
Oh.
The Democratic Labor Party, which was a Catholic-based party, was ferociously opposed to it. Had something to do with that.
In Australia, Mr Chipp has stated that censorship must ultimately depend on prevailing community standards. But where, at what point, and by what principle does he intend to draw the line?
Former teacher Soren Hansen now in his 70s and still living in Denmark, was one of the original authors of the book. Why does he think it caused such a sensation, looking back on it more than 30 years on?
I think all the fuss at that time really was about all the lies and all the secrets that was told, all the lies that was told to children about serious matters, really. I think they didn't took the children serious, really. Their needs were not taken serious. And that was about drugs that was coming up at that time, and that was about sex.
To illustrate our confused attitudes to sex, the simple instructional films from overseas, which these 8 to 12-year-old children see, cannot be shown by a ruling of the censor.
I think that was what the fuss was about, that we focused on these things, and we tried to tell about them in an understandable language, in an understandable way.
If I was a parent and had a young girl between the age of 10 and 13, I would object to the words in that section on sex, because I don't think there's any need for her to meet these words. One or two of those words, or one of them in particular, I met for the first time only the other day, and I don't really see any need for me to have known it. And I think that young girls may be upset about it, may inquire further, and find out things which really probably won't enter their lives at all.
I may say that the very worst advice that one could give to one's children would be, you must not read this book. I have told my children that there's not the slightest necessity to snigger about it in corners or to read it under the desk. By all means, let them read it. We'll discuss it together.
Author and psychologist Jesper Jensen was also one of the authors of the Little Red Schoolbook. Now in his 70s and living in Denmark, what are his thoughts about the impact and scandal of the book?
Well, what upset people most, I suppose, was really not the text of the book, because the chapter on drugs was a very sober one. The chapter on sex was a very sober one, frank but sober. What we did was to inform pupils about things that they were not supposed to know.
The schoolbook was a sensation because adolescents throughout Australia had never seen masturbation discussed in a sensible, downright non-moralistic way.
Oh, well, some boys, they wouldn't even know what masturbation was, would they?
Let alone to introduce them to techniques they may never have thought of in 1,000 years.
Do you think that sort of information may tend to encourage children to experiment?
Yes, I do, because I think children are terribly inquisitive about things they don't know anything about. And a child that didn't know what masturbating was, and his parents weren't prepared to tell him, would go and find out then probably from other boys or people at school, perhaps, and get quite the wrong slant on it altogether.
You've seen the section on sex. What do you think it might do to the children? Or should I say, do you think it offensive?
For the majority, it would. Certain words in there would be offensive, and it would, I think, genuinely shock a number of them. For a number also, there would be nothing new.
Perhaps we should say that this is for children over 10.
Now, the lower age limit, I think, should not be subjected to the language that is used in there.